God damn. Hey everyone, Sumo Spiffy here. The March 2025 Basho is over, and if you're watching a video about the Banzuke from May, I assume you know how it turned out. Great sadness spread across the land, and Onosato, probably the best wrestler in the sport and the newest guy to be on a Yokozuna run, also became the villain of all that is good and just in the world. But I somehow think he'll manage. In any case, we'll talk about how Takayasu absolutely did not choke in the tier list recap because he didn't choke, he fought really well, and for now it's time to whip up a little instant Banzuke for the next tournament. As always, we'll start with a little math and getting everyone lined up nice and orderly. Alright, so that's done, and did I say orderly? Cause, okay, this one's gonna be fun. Alright, let's just get into it. Starting at the top. Hoshoryu takes over Terunofuji's spot as the wounded Yokozuna a lot sooner than anyone expected or wanted. Onosato, he's gonna stay at Ozeki 1 East and Kotozakura at Ozeki 1 West, since Onosato finished with more wins than Koto. Very simple. Taisho, 9 and 6, he's gonna stay at Sekiwake 1 East and not really be on an Ozeki run, even though a couple more wins at the end would have put him on that path. And now things get a little bit interesting. You'll see I have Kiroshima at Sekiwake 1 West. Now, if you do math, if you know how the math works, what you'll know is that Takayasu, he was Maegashira 4 East, and 12 and 3 is +9. So if we just use these spots, so Maegashira 1 would be +3, and then you've got 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. So you just kind of write Takayasu in here. Kiroshima, on the other hand, was Komusubi 1 East, so he was down in this spot, and with 8 and 7, 8 minus 7 is 1, so he just ends up here. So if you are a stickler for the math, Takayasu should be well ahead of Kiroshima. However, Kiroshima was a Komusubi 1 East, that's important, the East part matters here, who had a winning record. Now if he was West, I still think that they would put him at Sekiwake ahead of Takayasu, but if you look at the last 20 years or so, which is really the most relevant time period, nobody who has gone 8 and 7 at Komusubi 1 East has been denied a Sekiwake slot because a Maegashira guy did a lot better. The only times they haven't been moved up is when there simply is not a Sekiwake slot available, one of those S1 slots, or there's one available but another Komusubi who did better takes it, or a demoted Ozeki takes it. If there's an open slot and nobody who's already in the Sanyaku has a better claim on it, the guy who went 8 and 7 as a Komusubi, he goes up there. So we should really expect Kiroshima to get it. That should be the default assumption here. But that's okay. Takayasu going to Komusubi, pretty normal with an extremely good record at high Maegashira. That's fine. Now you'll see I have Wakataka Kage and Wakamoto Haru also at Komusubi. Clear that out. The reason I have him here is, again, because of math. This is not necessarily what I think is going to happen. In fact, Wakamoto Haru being at Maegashira 1 West, 9 and 6, see, if you have a winning record at 1 East, you're going to get popped into these ranks. It's just going to happen. They'll make a new one for you if they have to. But if you go 9 and 6 even at 1 West, if there's no spot here, and right now 1 East Sekiwake is checked, West is checked, Takayasu should be ahead of Wakataka Kage, that's checked, and Wakataka Kage gets that one. Those slots are all taken. When that happens, 9 and 6 at 1 West just slides over to 1 East. That is unfortunate. I think they should consider making a new Komusubi slot for him, but that just isn't what they do. So barring some very unusual set of circumstances, which it doesn't look like we have, Wakamoto Haru will be at Maegashira 1 East. Now let's deal with some of these ties, because this is, oh boy, this is a little ugly. It's really not that difficult to put Oho back at Maegashira 1 West. He was a Sekiwake, he's coming down, so he's going to get a little bit of favoritism anyway, and he was ahead of everybody else tied with Tamawashi, but Tamawashi's not going to be put ahead of him in those circumstances. So Oho's going to go to 1 West. That seems pretty safe. Now, the big question here is, does Tamawashi get put ahead of Gonoyama and or Abi? Now, when we talk about Joi Preference, and if you're not familiar with the term, the Joi is the top 16 wrestlers. So there were 7 guys in the Sanyaku, which means the top 9 wrestlers, so down to Maegashira 5 East. That makes up the Joi. They have the most difficult schedules, or are expected to have the most difficult schedules, so they're often given a slight bit of preference in terms of ranking in the next Banzuke. Like, it acts as a tiebreaker sometimes, stuff like that. But that Joi preference tends to really kick in when they're being compared to somebody from further down the ranks. Anyone who's dropping out of the Sanyaku tends to get preference against literally anyone in Maegashira. So what is possible is that Abi actually bumps over to 2 East ahead of both Tamawashi and Gonoyama. Now that may seem kind of unfair, but I cannot understate the extent to which they may allow Abi to move back ahead of these guys simply because he was a Komusubi and Gonoyama was not, even though they had very similar schedules because they're both in those top ranks. Furthermore, if we move Abi over there, what that leaves us with is Tamawashi gets exactly his 5 rank increase on 10 and 5, and Gonoyama gets exactly his 1 rank demotion on 7 and 8. It actually works out really cleanly for what the Banzuke committee usually likes to do. So even though this doesn't make sense mathematically for the moment, this is what I'm going to go with. I think this is pretty likely. I'm not going to bet the house on it, but the main alternative I would see is Tamawashi ahead of Abi, because Tamawashi was mathematically a rank ahead of him. That's a decent gap. They may be like, well, you know what? Abi really should go down a little bit further, and it's okay if we overpromote Tamawashi a little bit. But when guys have been coming to like a new echelon, a new tier of the division, so to speak, they're given as close to the exact promotion as they can be, no more, no less. So for the moment, I'm going to leave Abi ahead of Tamawashi. But I think these 2 guys at Maegashira 2 and Gonoyama at Maegashira 3 is more likely than Gonoyama going back to Maegashira 2 East or West. Now, all that being said, Hiradoumi and Takerufuji fall into place very nicely. They both slide back a half a rank, Hiradoumi to 3 West, Takerufuji to 4 East. That's pretty simple. Chiyoshima, Ichiyamamoto, and Oshoma. Again, this is where the Joi preference comes in. Chiyoshima had a full Sanyaku schedule. Ichiyamamoto had all of the Sanyaku guys he could get. Once he started getting scheduled against them, Hoshoryu was already out of the tournament, so he had 6. Oshoma didn't have to fight any of those guys because he wasn't doing that well. He actually struggled to start with and had to come back to get to a 9 and 6 record. So for that reason, I am inclined to think they're going to put Chiyoshima and Ichiyamamoto ahead of Oshoma. Now, even though Chiyoshima and Ichiyamamoto were like quote-unquote equivalent because they were in the Joi, and they've had a tendency to put guys with better records ahead of the guys who started with a higher rank, in this case, if they put Ichi ahead of Chiyo, then Ichi doesn't get demoted at all. I don't think that's likely to happen. If anything, if this is wrong, I think the most likely way that it's wrong is that they move Oshoma ahead of Ichiyamamoto to make sure Ichi goes down a full rank. I think that's less likely. Again, they've been trying to give guys as precise a promotion as they can, it has seemed. It doesn't always work out that way, but in this case, they can leave Oshoma on exactly +3 by laying it out like this, so I think that is the most likely outcome. Now our next 3-way tie, Tobizaru, Ura, and Hakuoho. Now this one's a little more straightforward. Hakuoho almost has to go to Maegashira 7 East because one of these guys, Tobizaru or Ura, is going to have to go to 6 West and be over-demoted. If Hakuoho were to go ahead of either of them, they would have to be over-demoted by a full rank, not just a half rank. For a guy at Maegashira 9 to get moved ahead of someone who is in the Joi, who had to fight the Sanyaku, so that he gets over-demoted a full rank when it isn't necessary, I don't think there's any way that happens. So then the question is, does Tobizaru go ahead of Ura, or does Ura go ahead of Tobizaru? Now, when I started doing these, they would tend to put the guy with the higher rank ahead. But the last time something like this happened, where Ura was Maegashira 1 East, Oho was Maegashira 3 East, Oho was the 7 and 8 guy, Ura was the 6 and 9 guy, and one of them was getting over-demoted, Ura was the one who ate it. So this time, I'm going to just go by the same logic. I'm going to put the 7 and 8 guy ahead. I'm going to say Tobizaru gets knocked down the extra half rank, And if I'm wrong, screw the committee, they did the wrong thing. And now I'm really seeing how ugly this is going to get. We have a log jam here. We haven't had a good old log jam in a while. Now, if these guys all had winning records and were coming up, this would be easier, but of course one of them did not. To make things even more fun, Kinbozan was Maegashira 5 West, which had him on the border of the Joi. He had a couple Sanyaku opponents, but you can't really say he was in that group that had the much tougher schedules, because he really didn't. In fact, if anything, like, I predicted him to do pretty decently because I expected him to fight down in rank a lot, and he did that even more than I expected, and he still didn't do very well. So okay, let's just start lining these guys up. So Onokatsu and Churanoumi are at the top of the pile. If we prefer the guy with the better record, that means Churanoumi goes to Maegashira 7 West, Onokatsu gets bumped back. Fine. Now, if we keep them in this order, Aonishiki should go to 8 West, Midori Fuji to 9 East, and then Kinbozan and Meisei. If we leave Kinbozan in front, he's going down 4 ranks on 6 and 9. That's a full rank over demotion. This is the kind of thing that just never happens. It's been quite a while since we've had a situation where this was even possible, and to make things a little more complicated, they've been more willing to over-demote guys generally lately, just not full ranks. It's always a half a rank. So let me show you real quick the kind of setup that we would be likely to see in the past, like a couple years ago. It would be Kinbozan would stay at 8 West, so he would get his 3 rank demotion, and that would be it. And even though Aonishiki and Midori Fuji would be ahead of him by that half a rank mathematically, they would get put behind him because he was higher rank. They were more concerned about not over demoting guys than they were about making sure guys got promoted in accordance with their performances, with their winning performances. To make things in some ways more complicated, but in some ways less, because Aonishiki and Midori Fuji were tied, it would probably be more likely they leave Kinbozan ahead of both because there's no reason to split them up. It's really either you put him ahead of both and so he goes -3, or he goes behind both and then he goes -4. And because they would not over demote, this would be the gimme. Like, you could count on this happening. In fact, in some cases, they would even put Kinbozan ahead of all the guys with winning records just to make sure they didn't screw him over and all the guys with winning records stay together. There was a logic to it. Now, they could do that. That's never impossible with this committee, but it's a lot less likely these days than it was in the past. So are they going to put Kinbozan ahead of Aonishiki and Midori Fuji to save him that full rank over demotion? Or are they going to put him behind and be like, hey man, them's the breaks? Well, man, that's actually tough. Oh boy, let me think. You know what? We really haven't seen this before, so let's just try it and see how this all works out. Now, even though because Kinbozan was not quite in the Joi, I think normally they would put Meisei ahead of him if it wasn't going to over-demote him so significantly. Putting Meisei here and then dumping Kinbozan 4.5 ranks on 6 and 9, I don't think there's any way that happens. So I feel that Meisei at 10 East is a pretty safe bet. But now that leaves us with even more over demotions, because if Meisei goes there, Shodai has to get bumped back. Well, now you've got Endo and Shishi. They both have to go back. So let's just move them back, and then Atami Fuji to here. So in this case, so we have to figure out where Shishi goes, and already Shodai, Endo, and Atami Fuji have been over demoted by a half a rank. Again, in the past, the easy prediction would just be Shishi goes to Maegashira 12 East. These guys are already eating a half rank over demotion. That's crazy, like that never happens. But there isn't a whole lot of choice, so they're not going to make it worse by putting Shishi ahead of any of them. And that's very plausible in this case. But there's another possibility. Because, so if you were doing this, what was it, 6 months ago, 8 months ago, when Nishiki Fuji did not get demoted on a 6-9 record, which was unheard of, that also happened to Hokuto Fuji on the same Banzuke. And I will maintain my belief that I don't think one of them gets that benefit if the other doesn't. I think it was one of those situations where it's like, oh, multiple guys can do this, so they can't really claim favoritism. Or just a general sense of, well, it's a little more fair if it's not only one guy benefiting from this. There's no reason that they can't look at that from the perspective of, well, there's more than one guy getting screwed in the same way. Now, I don't think that means they're going to put Shishi ahead of Shodai. Like, Shodai was already ahead of him. That wouldn't make any sense. But they could very easily put Shishi ahead of Endo and Atami Fuji. Or they could at least put Endo ahead of Shishi, like they were tied. We don't have to put Endo further back. But Atami Fuji was behind Shishi, so they're going to just bump Atami Fuji further back. That way, Atami Fuji and Kinbozan both go down a full extra rank. So, hey, it's happening to two guys. You can't say we're targeting anybody, right? Now, there is another way of looking at this, which is Atami Fuji ate a pretty big demotion last time too. So are they gonna say, well, you know what? We don't want to do it to him twice in a row. This is already bad enough. We're just gonna leave Shishi at 12 East. They absolutely could do that. They could do that. But right now, I think if you're gonna have one guy go -4, you're gonna have two guys go -4. Because it just makes sense. Maybe you even have three, right? Maybe you have three. But I think you're going to have either 0 or 2. If they're going to put Atami Fuji ahead of Shishi, I think you're going to see Kinbozan ahead of Aonishiki and Midori Fuji. Or maybe, if it's one of those situations where they're arguing, he should be ahead of them both, he should be behind them both. Well, let's just put him between them both. They're going to pick the option that makes the least sense so that everybody's unhappy. It's not impossible, but this could be exactly what happens, because then you have a bunch of guys going down 3.5 ranks. Do not discount this possibility. But for now, I'm going to leave Midori ahead of Kinbozan because, hey, it's just a draft, but hey, you can look at this and be, oh my god, hot takes everywhere, woo. After that, Takano Sho and Toki Hayate slot in very nicely to their spots at 12 West and 13 East. Finally, we have some easy decisions. Now it's time to talk about the guys coming up from Juryo. And after last tournament, I have come up with a rough method of figuring this out so that I'm not just going off of vibes, right? So we've got Roga at Maegashira 13 West. Now he's coming up from Juryo, and he's ahead of everyone else mathematically. However, the theory goes like this. If a guy is in Makuuchi and he stays in Makuuchi with a winning record, he should go ahead of the guys coming up from Juryo. If a guy is in Makuuchi and he stays in Makuuchi with a losing record, he'll stay ahead of the guys coming up from Juryo who are near him mathematically. So the way that works out here is we've got Sada Naomi with a winning record and Kota Shoho with a winning record. They'll go ahead of Roga. However, Ryuden calculates to 17 East, Shona Naomi to 17 West, Roga calculated to 13 West. That's probably too big of a gap. So we're not going to put them ahead of Roga. However, if we leave them ahead of everyone nearby coming up from Juryo, then Ryuden goes to 15 East and Shona Naomi to 15 West, staying ahead of the other Juryo guys. The Ryuden demotion is pretty small. The Shona Naomi one is more okay. And actually, Shona Naomi might save Ryuden in this case, because Ryuden has to stay ahead of Shona Naomi, and if they're going to keep those guys ahead of the Juryo promotees, and really Kaio's the only one with an argument to stay ahead of them at all, then Ryuden's gonna get under-demoted. That's just how it is. So this is probably fine. Maybe Kaio gets lucky and goes to 15 East. For the moment, I'm not gonna put him there. The next part is, if you are in Juryo and then you calculate to Makuuchi, you stay ahead of anyone who was in Makuuchi and calculated to Juryo. And then after that, anyone who was in Juryo and doesn't calculate out of the division but gets promoted anyway goes to the back of the line. Now I know this last Banzuke that didn't hold because Shirokuma got ahead of Toki Hayate, but that was specifically because Toki Hayate had a losing record at the bottom rank and then a new rank opened up underneath him that he could drop into. So that was a special circumstance. But as a rule, I think this is a way to line things up. Juryo to Makuuchi mathematically ahead of guys who get saved from demotion because there aren't enough guys to keep them out. And then if they have to bring guys up from Juryo who didn't earn their way out of the division, they go at the bottom. So in this case, that would look like Kaio, and then Tamashoho, and then Tochi Taikai. By the way, Tochi Taikai, it wasn't even a year ago this dude bombed out of Juryo with a 5-10 record, barely earned his way back in he was 2-3 in Makushita, had to win his last 2 matches to get back in, and then he went 10-5, started the next tournament 8-3 before falling apart. Looked like a guy who's, maybe a Juryo lifer, right? And then he just comes back, goes 9-6, and now he's in the top division. How the hell did he do this? It's genuinely impressive. Like, I'm kind of curious to see how he ends up holding up here. But anyway, Nishikigi and Asakoryu should be the last guys in the division. Now, going by what they've done in the past, again, the better records have been tending to stay ahead of the higher rank with the worst record. Kota Shoho and Mitakayumi were good examples of this just last Banzuke. So in this case, I think Asakoryu at 17 West, Nishikigi at 18 East is the most likely way this gets finished off. Moving on to Juryo, always a good time. Hey, Kusano, this dude, holy cow. The question was raised on the Sumo forums, and I'm sure elsewhere, where the hell did this guy come from? He finished 4-3 in his last 2 Makushita Bashos. How does that translate into a 14-1 Yusho? Well, number one, look at the dude, he's friggin' enormous. Guys who are big and strong just have that kind of like super solid build. Think Onosato, think Takeru Fuji. When they get into the top 2 divisions, the game changes. In Makushita, guys are doing whatever they can do to win. But once you get to the top 2 divisions, it's like they're trying to do quote-unquote proper sumo. There's a lot more head-on collisions, and the dudes that size, they can really take advantage of that. That being said, there was a lot of that for Onosato and Takeru Fuji. Kusano, you go back and look at his last couple tournaments in Makushita, he was just getting beat by dudes. He was just getting hit and knocked backwards. It was against a lot of the guys he had to fight in Juryo, so I mean, it wasn't a bunch of super 3rd division scrubs, it was better guys. And if people start figuring him out, like people have started to figure out Takeru Fuji a little bit, you know, he could struggle a little bit in Juryo next tournament. Now, I don't suspect he's going to have a losing record and not make it to the top division in July, but I don't think you're going to see another 14-1. A couple people will figure him out, plus more than likely he's going to have to go up to Makuuchi and fight somebody, so then it depends who he fights there. But regardless, let's be positive. He had an incredibly impressive performance. Let's just enjoy the ride for as long as he can keep it up. All that being said, I don't think he's going to end up ahead of Hidenoumi. He's coming up from the bottom of the division. They tend to try to limit those guys as best they can, but they're not going to limit him more than this. Juryo 1 West, let's see how he does. He's probably going to smash several faces next time. Cool. Mitakayumi, more than likely, see, he could end up ahead of Kusano because they could just give him that preference of being a Makuuchi guy. This is very possible, but given just how dominant Kusano was, I kind of don't think they're going to do that. I think they're just going to put Mitakayumi ahead of Fuji Seiyun. Fuji Seiyun, he gets his shot at the top division. Let's see if he can do another 9-6. Takeru Fuji will just drop him at 3 West, Shirokuma, or Takeru Fuji 3 East, Shirokuma 3 West, and Hakuyozan goes all the way to 4 East with his 9-6 record. I can't believe how alive he looked. He even looked alive on day 15. He never does that. Tomokaze almost certainly just goes back to Juryo 7 East. Kotoeho definitely is going to be at 7 West again. They can't go any higher because they had losing records. So that means Wakaikari or Kagiaki. Which one goes to 4 West? Well, Wakaikari, I mean, Kagiaki he just sucked every ass this time. It was really, really sad to watch. I actually thought he was going to do pretty good because he's been doing pretty decently when he's gone back to Juryo over the last year or so. This time, it was a disaster. He had nothing for anybody. Hitoshi and Daisei-san, again, will go with the better record over the higher rank. Plus, they were both towards the bottom, so why the hell not? Shimanoumi continues to pick exactly the right time to put in exactly the right amount of effort. He goes 8-7, does nothing for the second week of the Basho, but goes up 4 ranks, right? And then Tsurugisho, he's going to go up +3 on his 8-7, unless some of you might have been looking at Nishiki Fuji down here. Are they going to push him further up? And the answer is maybe. So these are the options I see being most likely. I don't think he's going to be ahead of Hitoshi or Daisei-san. He could, like back in the day, they would see Tsurugisho, Shimanoumi, and then they would see these guys all together and be like, okay, look, there's a huge gap. Let's just put Nishiki Fuji there. And they might do that this time. But I think it's just as likely that they see, okay, Hitoshi and Daisei-san, I mean, Daisei-san having hope for the future, the way he's been fighting, I don't know. But they might be like, all right, we'll just put Nishiki Fuji ahead of these 2 8-7 guys because they barely had winning records. They're kind of busted up. I mean, whatever their rationale ends up being, because they still go up an extra rank and a half. they're not going to complain about that, right? Tohakuryu, he's going to stay at 9 West because he can't go past that with his losing record. Shiden should therefore end up at 9 East, a little bit of an under demotion, good for him. Oshaumi, kind of felt bad for him. He's finally shown some life and then he gets hurt again. So we'll move him to 10 East. Again, keeping it all in order. Hatsuyama to 10 West, 2.5 on his 8 and 7. Kazakeno, same thing. Wakano Sho, he can just not get demoted with his 7 and 8 record. Awesome. Mitoryu, ugh, he's done. He's got to be done, right? He has to be. He has to be. That was just, if you watch Juryo, you know what I'm talking about. Nabatame, I mean, I'm kind of glad he's staying in Juryo. I hope he heals though. I mean, he barely saved himself. I really hope he's okay. Like, I really hope staying in the tournament, coming back into the tournament, I should say, didn't screw him up at all. Because when he's on point, he's really, really fun to watch. At this rank, he should be able to do work if he's at least reasonably healthy. Let's cross our fingers that he gets there. And now we got the guys coming up. There's 4 slots left. Well, Miyagi is going to get the top 1. Like, oh, wait, what about the guys who are getting demoted? So, here's the thing. Could Hokuto Fuji get saved? Could he avoid demotion? Yes, maybe. But he's not going to go ahead of all the guys getting promoted. He's definitely not going to go ahead of the guy who earned his way into the division with his winning record at the top Makushita rank. So let's hold off on Captain Faceplant for now. Dayamami, he should get there. He was 4 and 3 at Maegashira 2. That commonly makes it into Juryo, no problem. And now we've got Mita and Aqua. Now, I put Aqua here because I'm sure a lot of people don't know how the promotions from Makushita into Juryo work. The Makushita Joy is here. It's 1 through 5. If you're below this line, you have to go 7 and 0 or you're not getting promoted. Aqua looks, if you don't know that, like he should get one of the slots in Juryo, but he's not going to because of this. When you're in these ranks, any winning record could potentially get you there if there is a spot open for you. So Mudoho is eligible, Aqua is not. So we're looking at Mita and Mudoho. Now Katanawaka is injured. I don't think he's supposed to come back even in May because he really screwed up his knee. So they're not going to try to make a point of keeping him in Juryo. Aotsuji is obviously behind everybody else. So Mita at the very least is going to go up. So is it Mudoho or is it Hokuto Fuji? Well, in the recent past, yet again, we have seen a movement towards veterans who struggle just being pushed out of their spot. They're not being protected. Even though Mudoho is only a half a rank ahead of Hokuto Fuji mathematically, that's probably gonna be enough to move him up. Unfortunately, the people who know this stuff better than I do have not opined on the subject publicly yet, so I'm just going with my best guess. And right now, yeah, I'm thinking it's probably going to be Mudoho. I don't want it to be. I want Mudoho at Makushita 1 and Hokuto Fuji at Juryo 14 West. Please give Captain Faceplant another chance. Please, I'm going to leave Hokuto Fuji here because manifesting is not real, but it's the only thing I can do right now. Please, please, please keep Captain Faceplant in the division. Give him another chance. Now, I say that, and it's probably better if he's going to continue fighting. Having like a rehab session in Makushita might not be that bad of an idea. I just hope he either retires if he knows he can't do it anymore, like no shame in that, he's been great, or if he continues, I hope he lands in the spot that'll help him succeed. We know he's more than good enough to absolutely wreck face at the bottom of Juryo, but he's got to be healthy enough, and his knee has been a problem for a while. There's absolutely no reason to think it's going to be more than 50% or something like that. So if he wants to continue, is he going to benefit more from only having half a schedule in Makushita? Or is he going to be healthy enough to turn things around at the bottom of Juryo? I don't know. I hope he gets whatever's best for him. Captain Faceplant is great. And if we have seen the last of the captain, salute to you, sir. It's been a hell of a ride. And that is the instant Banzuke, leaving March 2025, going into May 2025. It's kind of crazy. I wouldn't be surprised if people have lots of different ideas from what I've put down here. Let me know what you think, especially about those potential super over demotions for Kinbozan, Atami Fuji, and maybe even Endo. Do you think it's plausible? Do you think it's likely? Do you think it's impossible? Talk to me in the comments. As always, the tier list recap will be out as soon as I can get it done. In fact, once I'm done editing and I post this video, I'm going to start writing that immediately. So keep an eye out for that. Have a great day, and I'll see you soon.